Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with my continuing playthrough of Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 8.52. Alright, the battle for Poland continues. Not going all that well for the Poles. Not that we really expected much different, but Germany had put in my opinion, a skeletal force, though obviously it looks like it's, some minor problems here, but looks like it's going to be enough. With this level of forts, unless there's some sort of shenanigans going on, I don't see the Germans being able to break through the French border. Not if the French keep up reasonably. I mean, if it goes down to one crappy garrison division or something, well, that's a different matter. Oh. Okay. War. Okay, so Soviet Union has declared war on Poland. And I guess because they had been the Allies, notice that that's no longer, they've been removed from the Allies. Okay. How interesting. Ribbentrop asked the Poles for the return of Danzig and the strip of land. Guarantee independence of Poland. Great. Well, I guess they're joining the Allies again. They're at war with Germany and Slovakia, at war with the Soviet Union. I guess they did that to keep us from going to war with the Soviets, because we aren't at war with the Soviets. Are we? Oh, okay, good. Just wondering what and how they're doing it. Okay. Interdiction tactics. Well, that's nice, but we're going to stop all of that. That is here. We'll do supply production a little bit ahead of time, but and we've also got organized up APEF here. 2 corps, one under Montgomery, under the Adelschot. One and under what's this? Slim. Don't know much about him historically. He needs to get on port post him. Take it. Oh, come on, people. Transport to France. Okay. Bay of Biscay. Now we're trying to sink you. Adjust. Up a bit. I'm going to move these guys to the top, make sure they're in production because we're losing. So, I mean, we're not dangerous, but I don't even want to go near a point of, do I have enough transports? Okay, medium artillery brigades have been improved. Max them out. Come on, other 39 techs. Be useful. No, we're not going down the rocket path. Just don't need to build those. Oh, Indian Army. Okay. We want to do that. Still weren't. Currently, the advice is, yeah, I'm a couple days ahead from what's being released. The current advice is not to bring the Netherlands in early. That's sort of my inclination right now. As you can see, once the Soviets come in, any hope is gone for Poland. Okay, well, we have some new opportunities for research here. Home front coordination. Supply throughput down, but transfer cost improved. Unit cooperation, repair rate. We'll go for partisan suppression. But if you have thoughts on the... do I have? I think... yeah, a couple of destroyers here. Second destroyer squadron. Yeah, they could use the bolstering of a light cruiser. In the anti-submarine role. Now, of course, I've been saying this, but it's quite true. I've been thinking mostly in terms of how I play as Germany, so I think they should come up here. It's too far away. So I realized that the subs that I had out there sort of kind of operating well, since I control both ends of the Mediterranean. Obviously Germany, who I'm at war with, doesn't have any convoys moving through there. So I'm moving them out for now. I'll move them back in once Italy heads to war with the Allies. Come on, let us go back in. Standard is a very fast unit, so it moved in, surrounded, they cut off that. Okay. Snowfall begin, winter is coming. Yes, yes. Probably most all of us have been watching the Game of Thrones series. I must admit, I get to where a few of the storylines I'm just sort of fast forwarding through. Because it's alright, but not that great. Some of the storylines. Okay, radar training. Okay. And recon unit. Okay, we'll let that go since it's a 39 tech. Still that we're researching artillery unit combined arms. Advance. And that one we're going to move over to naval, I think. Range finding equipment. I always thought it was cool, the horizontal tube the Germans used for range finding. You'd look in and they'd have the two outward, or the two, sort of like binocular things out on sort of the far ends of it, sort of like a hammerhead shark. And it looks sort of cool that they're looking at it, and they look at that, and then one guy would be constantly keeping them in focus, and by doing so it would read off the range of their, like, presumably air targets is what it was, so that they could know that it's X distance away to set the bursting charge for the anti-aircraft rounds. Okay, so propelled artillery, we'll do that. Yeah. We lost the Tirpitz. Okay. The 23rd Northumbrian Division. Headquarters, yes. A lot of headquarters. Okay. Industrialization of farms. Gain a lot of supplies, 100 manpower, and an ongoing bonus of 10% manpower for minus 500 money. Okay. Scrap metal drive. Normally I just dismiss all these because they're normally well enough balanced out. 10,000 metal. Get a year's cool down. It's the only one that we are I'm gonna go no. Definitely no. We don't need the supplies. We don't need the fuel. Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company. The company built tanks including the A-10 Cruiser, Churchill tank, Cromwell and Challenger, plus the Hamilcar gliders. Yep, good show. That'll give us the tank factory and the aircraft guns. The Metropolitan Caramel Carriage and Wagon Company. Another, presumably, carriage and wagon. I'm presuming they're not meaning horse-drawn wagons. They're meaning train car type things. Second World War Metro-built tanks, again, including the Valentine tank and light tank Mark 8. Yeah, that sounds like another good one. And no field mechanization. Nuffield, whatever. During the war, Nuffield Mechanizations was engaged in military production. Among their activities was the production of Liberty L-12 engines for use in British tanks of the period. 1939, one of the subsidiaries was given the opportunity to take part in the production of the Covenanter tank, then being designed, but opted to develop their own version of the design, which became the Crusader tank. Millfield mechanization followed this with the Cavalier tank. which used the Liberty engine as well, although the tank was in production. The power of the Liberty engine was limited because of the increased tank's weight. The Cavalier was not used in combat. The last tank that Liberty engine was produced for was the A-27L Centaur tank, effectively an underpowered Cromwell tank. Okay. Any tank factories, anti-aircraft guns? Yep. Women's Land Army. This is a sort of like the RAD for women, basically, in many ways. It's not like the WACS or something in the American service. It is a mostly uniform, though that's maybe pushing it a bit, organization. They were given uniform, but I don't know that how much they were required to wear them while working. Basically, it was women's land labor service would probably be a more correct, less militaristic term for what they were doing, in that they were uniformed, yes, but they were never like given arms training or anything militaristic like that. It was purely to replace men working on the farm. I haven't even read this little description. They very well may have been working in other fields at other times, but it was primarily a replace farm workers so that farm workers can go to war. Okay, as the prospect of war became increasingly likely, the government wanted to increase the amount of food grown within Britain. In order to grow more food, more help was needed on the farms, and so the government started the Women's Land Army. In June 1939, the majority of the land girls already lived in the countryside, but more than a third came from London and the industrial centers of the cities of the north of England. In the Second World War, though, under the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, it was given an honorary head, Lady Deanman. At first it asked for volunteers. It was supplemented by conscription, so that by 1944, over 80,000 members. The Women's Land Army lasted until the official disbandment until 1950. I didn't know that. See, I did know very much that Britain, as well as the continent, was under continued rationing well after the war. Some of that I think is reasonable. Some of that is just, particularly in Britain, a big mistake. They should have just opened it up, and capitalism would have fed everybody. Trust me, they would have. Now it's different when your railways and bridges are blown up. Like, of course, the U.S. and Britain bombed lots of infrastructure in France leading up to D-Day, as well as other reasons. And of course, Germany got bombed all to hell. It's one thing going, oh, we have to ration food because we're importing food, but it's difficult to transport it efficiently to locations, and so that wouldn't necessarily be a problem. But I think the British rationing that went on way too long, partially I think because the Labour government came in power, trying to make everything fair, because rationing would have meant price changes, of course. I mean, if you got rid of it, but people may just think that I'm just an evil capitalist or something. No, I really think the evidence shows that, yeah, it needed a transition period, but there is no reason for the long-term rationing after the war. A year later, it just wasn't there. But like it said, this was a conscript service. That's why I said it was very similar to the RAD for the women. But like the women's RAD, till the very end as they're being invaded. The Women's Land Army was not a militarized combat organization. Like I said, uniformed in a way, but it was to use labor, and I think, almost in fact I know, part of the element was to get a lot of these young women, and I don't know the ages, doesn't say there, but I think at least 18 years old, but I don't know exactly what ages you were conscripted to go into it, is to get the young girls out of the cities that were being targeted and bombed, because you're much safer in the countryside. And there were a lot of women old enough to not be in the Women's Land Army, but very young enough to work. I'm thinking late 20s, early 30s type women that went into the factories in Britain and did lots of work. And even if they had fairly young children, I don't know how formalized the system they worked out, but obviously whether it was grandmothers or other women looked after a lot of the other young kids. Now, they also, particularly in London, evacuated a lot of the children too. But there was very much the sense of getting the women out of the cities, the young women, because they're going to be the next generation, to get them safe and away from the bombing out there. So let's see, until 68, so until the end of this thing, minus 2% on ICs, supplies plus 15%. Okay, well, stay at home. I don't know if I agree about the reductions. I definitely agree about the bonus. Western approaches. Okay, well. Install Lord Beaverbrook. The industrial management skills of Lord Beaverbrook radically transformed the UK aircraft production. Under Beaverbrook, production and aircraft repair by astonishing 20%. Okay, so we'll get air bases and pillboxes all over. He becomes armament minister. Okay, we need to look and see if we get okay, yeah, their organization. And Advanced Air Strike Force. Before World War II, it had been agreed between the UK and France, that should be France, not the French, or France, that in the case of war, the light bomber force of the RAF would move to airfields within France again, from which it could operate against targets in Nazi Germany. To achieve this, the RAF Advanced Air Striking Force, AASF, or Advanced Striking Force, okay, was formed from Group Number 1, and its 10 squadrons of very, they're running words, battle dispatch to the airfields in Reims area on that. Okay, tally ho, chaps. Okay, so we'll get, presume, the SOB here. We'll look for it. Okay, the 4th Indian Red Eagle Division. A lot of cool events coming. This is great. The 4th Indian was ready for deployment to North Africa. Historically, the division was formed in Egypt in 1939 and was the first Indian formation to go overseas during the Second World War. As with all formations of the Indian Army prior to independence, it primarily had British officers and Indian other ranks. However, it did include Indian officers within its ranks as high as captain and major. During World War II, it took part in campaigns in East Africa, Syria, North Africa, Italy. One of the key units in the division were the Sir Moore Rifles, an elite Gurkha unit. Oh, cool. The 2nd King Edward's own Gurkha Rifles, the Seymour Rifles, was an infantry regiment of the British Indian Army before being transferred to the British Army on India's Independence Day. The Second World War saw the 2nd Gurkha serving in many theaters: Cyprus, North Africa, and the invasion of Italy, Malaya, and Burma. Excellent, most excellent. Now, while we're on the subject, the Gurkhas are people from a group of tribes in Nepal. Fairly warrior-like tribes. The British fought them. The Gurkhas were the primary warriors, as I understand it, fighting the British way back when. Basically, to some degree, I don't know who won. Obviously, Nepal is independent at this time and has been. But because of that, the British started recruiting Gurkhas. I think there were 10 Gurkha regiments, battalions, regiments. I think regiments that were recruited, were used. They were officially part of the Indian Army. When India gained its independence, again, I think it was 4 of the regiments went to the British Army and stayed part of Britain. The other 6 were given over, like it said, to the Indian Army. And I think the Indian Army still maintains them, although it had been, the Gurkha headquarters had been in Hong Kong until near the independence. It's now, I believe, the headquarters, and they still have like a battalion or so. It's very small. They maintain it. It's all volunteers. I mean, technically they're mercenaries in that, the British are allowed to recruit by the Nepalese government, so it's all officially approved. They're not like freelance mercenaries or whatever, but they're paid to fight, and they're very good soldiers, and they're now headquartered somewhere in Britain. They had, for the longest time, they had been kept out of Britain for any extended deployment time. You know, they fought very well in the Falklands, and so they're very good soldiers. That's for several reasons. One is it's very hard to get into the Gurkhas today, so they, they almost recruit them, 4 or 5 at a time. They're long service soldiers, and they go through, a very rigid selection process, so they get just sort of the best. And they're coming from just a few of the tribes that are allowed to the people to volunteer from. So it's very hard to get in, and that's why they remain good. Okay, convoy raiders. Yes, we want them. I'm one of the champions, I do believe, of the policy. At least Q ships, which are slightly different than commerce raiders. Convoy raiders are hidden ships. Obviously you can have the Graspe or the Bismarck being commerce raiders, but this is the idea of disguised commerce raiders. Sometimes sort of called Q ships, but in that they're disguised and get close enough to enemy convoys, they attack them. The Q ship originally very much was an anti-submarine operation, in that they would go along looking like regular merchant ships, and when attacked, they would then attack the submarines. This was mildly effective in World War I, in which World War I, and in World War II also, but particularly in World War I, torpedoes were very expensive. And if you have a small or medium-sized freighter that's sort of moving along through the ocean, and the submarine sees them, and even that day, many ships didn't have radios, and even if they did have radios, the idea that there was enough response time to get sort of what we're doing right here in the Bay of Biscay, try to identify, come in and attack the enemy subs, was very difficult. So the submarines would surface, use their main gun to disable and sink. First disabled by, taking out the engine compartment or screws on the ships so that they couldn't move, and then poke holes in them and sink. And generally in that time frame, the crews could get off and go away and whatever and sink them. So what they would do is try to look like vulnerable targets. The submarines would come up to surface, and then the crews on board would be ready to sink the submarines. They tried some of that in World War II, rather unsuccessfully, I believe. And Churchill was one of the champions to some degree of that, mainly because by this time, even though they were expensive, the subs just wanted to hit and shoot and sink even lone ships with their torpedoes, just to put one into them and hopefully knock out power that's being generated by the engine quick enough and fast enough so that they don't report an enemy contact, so that they'd be away. So yeah, we'll take those. And coal. No, we don't need any coal. The Vulcan Foundry. Okay, from 1939, the works was mostly concerned with the war effort, becoming involved in development and production of the Matilda tank. From 43 large orders were received from the Ministry of Supply for locomotives, 390 Osprey, whatever, saddle tanks. Okay, don't know really about those, but cool. Sterling, I don't know those. Okay, now this should start making some of our tank production quicker, cheaper. Moving over to that. Now I want to see where we got the fourth Indian. Okay, well they need a lot of work getting it to ready levels here. Yeah, the Gurkhas, that'll be nice. And oh, okay, they're over here now. Okay, these are tactical guys. So there we go. Good tactical. Good with the bomber command. There's BC. There we are. Oh yeah, we'll fly him over here. No, not big enough. Not big enough. Big enough. Oh, that's big enough. Move them over there. So reorganize. Now I sent these guys over here. So let's see. Oh, can we? Okay. So you want to do some strategic bombing at night. That has at least a factory in it. See how well night bombing goes. We'll let these guys get organized up a little better. Okay. Cash and carry. This was the, if I understand, yeah, the U.S. Was the pre-element to Lend-Lease. Basically, it allowed, because America had passed at various times various neutrality acts, as you know, not to sell arms to one side or another in different conflicts. Yeah, okay, the Neutrality Act of 1936, sort of looking ahead. This changed the law that allowed Britain or the Allies, also the French as well, and theoretically the Poles or whoever, but to buy arms in the U.S., but they had to come with cash, and basically they had to carry them away. And that's sort of why it's cash and carry. I believe at one point during this period, before Lend-Lease was properly going on, one of the either fighters or light bomber types or multiple, they would literally fly them to an air base that was right along, you know, some, not just improvised, but sort of set up air base, I don't know exactly where, but right along the Canadian border. They would fly them in, pilots would land them, and maybe this was the Neutrality Act period or the cash and carry, I think cash and carry, but that they could not ship, this was maybe the Neutrality Act period, they could not ship the weapons over to Britain, so they would park the airplanes literally right on you know, on the edge of the border there, where they, you know, like painted a line on the concrete, and a Canadian guy would sort of walk over and hook a tow rope to it, and they would tow the aircraft across just to the other side of the border, and then take it away, you know, fly it away or whatever. And that's how they were transferring some of this stuff. And so once, I haven't even read all this yet, once the cash and carry concept is that whether you could ship to Canada, which was at war, or British or Commonwealth ships could come in and be loaded in American ports and go away, but you shouldn't, I believe, we'll quickly look at this, be loading the weapons, munitions, war supplies or whatever on American ships and sending them into a British port. So it was sort of like they had to come, have the cash, not loans, not you know, a Lend-Lease situation. It was, you had to have the cash, you can buy your weapons, but you had to haul them away. So this is the prospects. Roosevelt policy replaced the Neutrality Act of 36. Allows the sales of materiel to belligerents as long as the recipients arrange for the transportation using their own ships, and paid immediately in cash. The purpose was to hold neutrality between the United States and European countries while still giving material aid to Britain. Various policies forbade the selling of implements of war or lending money to belligerents. Oh, and that, yeah, in that, the idea, I do believe, yeah, under any terms. So a U.S. bank couldn't lend the money to Britain for Britain then to use that money to buy American arms. It had to become, you know, British money. The economic situation in the U.S. was rebounding at this time after the Great Depression, but there was still need for industrial manufacturing jobs. Yes. I know the current wisdom in most university economics department is that Franklin Roosevelt's policies helped out during the Great Depression, and that he got us through the Great Depression. In my opinion, in my understanding of economics, he is the person responsible for the Great Depression. Yes, it started before he was president, but it would have been a bad depression, a probably worse depression, but extremely brief, meaning a year, 2 years maximum, without his intervention. He is the one that literally, up until this time, extended the Depression because they dumped so many regulations on everything in the United States, and I mean everything. They told you what you could grow, and this is in the land of the free. They told you what crops you could grow. They told you what you could sell them for. And all of this was incredibly regulated. And how could they do that? The federal government, because it is clearly unconstitutional for the federal government, which they can still, some of the laws are still in act today and still being actively enforced today. Not all of them, maybe not even most of them, but some of them still are. Is they did it under the what they're calling is interstate commerce clause, meaning the federal government has the ability to regulate commerce between North Virginia or North Carolina and Virginia here, and so they can set a standard. Say if you you know, a health standard for the foods or whatever it is, so that some business here doesn't send poison foods up to Virginia. Okay, fine. But even foods not being, you know, transshipped were regulated under this. Everything got regulated under this. It just incredibly went out. Now, I'm not even saying some of the, you know, the regulations that we still have aren't good regulations. It's just unconstitutional for the federal government to do this, where it's very constitutional for each state government to do it, as under our Constitution. But because of the over-regulations, he extended the Depression greatly. He also made sure, as much as they could, that people didn't starve. He also set up programs under the NRA, and that's not the National Rifle Association, it's the National Relief Act, I believe, and other programs to put people to work in various public works jobs. So what he did was he extended the length of the Depression, but alleviated its worst elements and put a lot of people at minimal work levels. This really stifled business. But also, at this time, if you were making, I don't know, let me just throw out a number, $100,000 a year or more, once your money that you get up to, I don't know, over $50,000. Now, $50,000 is like $1 million today or something. You know, it's a lot of money. But if you're making over that kind of money, your first part of the money you're paying at maybe 50% income tax. But by the time you're getting up around to your $100,000 or more a year, you're paying like 90+% income tax. So even if it's only on like the last $10,000, you make that $10,000, they take $9,000 of that $10,000. So if you made $150,000, this is whether it's salary or whether it's profit on your business, it's whatever it is. You make this money, they take 90% of it away from you. Personally, and this is not to pay for a war in Europe. This is to deal with the Great Depression, so that they would take all this money. So what it did do is it, and this was also for businesses and things like this, in percentages, and I don't know all the details and I can't give them to you, but they were penalizing any high levels of success. So people had active incentives to not develop the economy, not to grow jobs, not to be able to hire people. Remember, this is in the age before microwaves. This is in the age before going to, I'll admit it, I don't do what I call cooking. I know how to cook. I know a little bit, just a little bit. I don't do that. I heat things up in the microwave. I normally buy semi-prepared foods or mostly prepared foods and heat them up in the microwave. I don't get, I'm not talking like, a live chicken, but I don't even just get like uncooked chicken that's sort of chopped up in pieces and then cook it. I don't do that because I'm not a cook. I live alone. So yeah, I don't cook. I can go to the grocery store and get economically reasonably cheap, mostly prepared food that I heat up. But back in this period, you couldn't do that for the great majority of the population. There wasn't the infrastructure that made a lot of prepared foods. Yeah, you could buy pre-cooked bread, but a lot of people still made bread in their homes, okay? So that if you wanted good food, you either had a family member, often the wife, but family member, make the foods, which are time-consuming and energy-consuming, if you will. Or you had to go out to eat in a restaurant, or you had to hire in labor. Well as clean, vacuums were coming around. They had some vacuums, but they didn't have a lot of homes. Most homes didn't have washing machines that you just throw the laundry in, put in some soap, turn it on. When it's done, take it out and put it in the dryer and turn that on. And when it's done, no, you had to go through all the process of doing all the laundry by hand. So you had a labor-intensive still society. Sure, you had electricity. Sure, you had indoor plumbing. You were starting to get air conditioning at this time, so some modern elements were happening. But if you had people, if you had money, you would want servants, okay, as we call them, or domestic staff, or whatever you would want to call them. So if they weren't taking all that money out into the government, people could be hired to do domestic work and not just come like once a week to clean or something like it. But there was a lot of demand for it. If you look at some of the movies and TV, there was a lot of demand for the relatively small middle class and above to have one or two domestic people either living with them or coming daily and doing it, an 8-hour a day, 5 days a week job in your house. And so had these people, then even not at the 90%, but at the 50% or the 60% level, if they weren't taking all that money away, that money would have been spent on people for having jobs, even at the home economics level, and not at Ford or GM or some major industrial concern. But it would have meant jobs. It would have meant a roaring economy. And I know this for a fact, that because of all these regulations, because of the high taxes, it stifled the ability to grow. And all of those men and women, because they're used valets and handyman jobs, and a lot of that stuff would have also gone to men as well. All of those people would have been making a reasonable income, and when they were off work going home, they might stop at a local diner and get food, or buy another shirt at the store, or whatever else that would have increased the economic activity. So I am absolutely sure and convinced that it was Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his policies that kept America in the Great Depression. And yes, I think, though not nearly as heavily-handed, but is what is Obama's policies are keeping America in this sort of minor depression that we're in, or lack of growth, or whatever you want to call it. It's like I say, it's nothing comparable in the severity levels. That I'm not talking about. I'm not equating what's going on in my country today with the severity levels back then. But I'm talking the general government regulation, strangulation. And we're not talking about, get to pollute as much as you want. There's much more than that going on. So, but it wasn't until this period with this cash and carry that you really started to get America coming back on an economic boom time, making up armaments for World War II. And I was coming to this point all along. So this is the start of the end of the Great Depression for the United States. So that is my monologue on that. Okay, yeah, we may revisit it at some time. The Ball of Fire Division was formed in Hyderabad, India. Historically, the Indian 5th Infantry Division was a infantry division in the Indian Army during the Second World War, which fought in several theaters of the war and was nicknamed Ball of Fire. It was one of the few Allied divisions to fight three major enemy armies, Italian, German, and Japanese. One subordinate unit of the 5th Division was the 4th Gurkha Rifles. The 4th Gurkha Rifles, Prince of Wales Gurkha, was the infantry regiment of the Indian Army. It was originally raised in 1857 as part of the British Indian Army. After independence, it was one of the 6 Gurkha regiments transferred. Yeah, okay, see, I was right. 6 to India and 4, I think it's out of 10. 4 to Britain. The regiment saw service in theaters in the Second World War, including the Middle East, North Africa, Italy, and Far East. Okay. Forms in Hyderabad. Combined Chiefs of Staff. The Chiefs of Staff Committee was initially established as a subcommittee of the Committee of Imperial Defense in 1923. It remained as such until the abolition of the CID upon the outbreak of World War II in 1939. The initial composition of the committee was the professional heads of the 3 services, the First Sea Lord, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, and the Chief of the Air Staff. Each service head took turns being chairman of the committee. Though this is a later picture, because I believe that is Marshall, General Marshall of the U.S. Army. I believe that's him there. I'm just looking at that. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think so. He's an American, of course. Okay. Do that. Leyland Motors. During the war, Leyland Motors, along with most vehicle manufacturer, was involved in the production of war production. Leyland built the Cromwell tank at its works from 1943, as well as medium-large trucks such as the Leyland Hippo, Hippo, and Retriever. The Lancashire Steam Motor Company was renamed the Leyland, I'm still not sure, Motors in 1907, where they took over Cothard's Preston. I don't know any of these old companies, who had been making steam wagons since 1897. They also built a second factory in the neighboring town of Corley. Okay, armaments manufacturing and aircraft in Preston. Great. Veteran units will take that now. So we have this. Not exactly sure how we're going to use this committee as any sort of command function or not. We'll give them to home command. And the 5th Division. Okay, well, good. Now we have more divisions here in India. That's good. Okay, I think we're going to take this opportunity to end this episode. It's gone on long enough. Try to keep these from getting too long. If you guys want to give feedback on the length of episodes, right now I think a few people early on, because some of and maybe I'm making the mistake of not doing what some of the greats like Quill 18 and Aruba 7 do, are a lot of like 20-minute episodes. So that they're sort of short. You sort of get your daily fix and go on. I'm currently still able to do 40+ minute episodes daily, but a few people were sort of feeling a bit overwhelmed, I know. But if maybe I'm making a mistake and not following that format, but maybe I'm making the right decision by not following the format so as to be different. If everything's the same, why would you want to You know, obviously there's other differences. The levels of history and focus do change, but if you think they're getting a bit long, I mean, I'm not going to go much longer than I'm doing, but I'm trying to keep them under an hour, definitely. And generally speaking, over 40 minutes is what I'm trying to do with these. But I can use feedback if you have an opinion, for or against. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Thanks for liking the episodes. I do appreciate all those people who do. And of course, I really appreciate, and I really do, is you guys can comment whether on my views on history or economics or whatever, or just let me know if I missed some unit somewhere that I need to get into action, or something that you guys spot that I may have missed while playing. I do appreciate that as well. So see you next time.